Hi, everybody. It's been a bit. To Discussions in Education. This is Tony Alberts, and today is a monologue episode. Wow. Yeah, no, it has been a while. Gosh, I think my last episode was end of April. Uh, yeah. So, welcome to what happens when you are a teacher. It is the end of the school year, and then it is the beginning of summer. Finished the school year off. We did our big project. We had a huge presentation, essentially kind of a science fair style presentation of our eighth graders' work for the Mars Colony project. I don't know if I mentioned that before. Myself and 7 other teachers and a couple of other elective teachers as well. Kids created a colony for Mars and planned it out and created the type of government and try to figure out what sort of science was necessary in order to survive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things, they put it together, and then they presented it to their classes individually or with their groups, and then they essentially like a school-wide, district-wide presentation. We invited a bunch of people from the district office to come through and from other schools. So they all came through and they checked it out and got great reviews. Everybody loved it. The kids did really well. There was the usual bell curve of performance. A lot of folks in the middle who did pretty well, and a lot of folks on the high end, and then some folks on less than high end who were just kind of wandering during the presentation instead of presenting. But that went well. And so that was about a week before the end of school. We had Great America the next day, which is our field trip up here. And graduation practice, and then 8th grade graduation. Now, that's that's a funny thing. We talked about it a lot while it was going on. It's one of those things where, kids ask, "Oh, what did you guys do for 8th grade graduation?" And my response is, when I was your age, we didn't have an 8th grade graduation. Apparently, my wife's district might have. I don't know. I've heard that some districts in LA had 8th grade graduation back in the day. But yeah, 8th grade graduation is a new thing. And so, for those who are unaware or maybe who don't have this experience, 8th grade, you now kind of they have all these new ceremonies and graduation movements. It's really weird, but in kindergarten now, you graduate from kindergarten to first grade. A lot of schools do that. I don't know if Oak Grove District does, but I know quite a few schools that do. And it's like a whole ceremony where sometimes it's just like, the kids sit there. Sometimes they even have like little caps and gowns and they graduate. And then depending on the district, sometimes there's a 5th or 6th grade graduation, which is also weird. Generally, that one's not a dress up. They wear nice clothes and they hand out awards and stuff. And I don't know if they get diplomas for that one. Then a lot of districts have an 8th grade graduation. Some are just, wear nice clothes. Some are actually cap and gown. Again, really weird. And then you have your high school graduation, which, again, cap and gown and all that stuff. And kids were asking my opinion, and other teachers were too. My opinion is, you don't need a fucking 8th grade graduation. Kids are, folks are like, well, they should celebrate their achievement and what they earned. I was like, yeah, but the problem is like, we don't hold kids back anymore. Like, that's not a thing. And most kids don't drop out of school in 8th grade either. So everyone graduates from 8th grade. You could get straight Fs all year. At the end of your 8th grade year, you could you still get units and stuff, or GPA points. You could have a 0.0 or a 0.15 at the end of 2 years of middle school or 3 years of middle school, and you will still go on to high school. We're not holding you back. Sorry, that ship has sailed. Yeah. That doesn't happen anymore. So, there's not really an achievement there. Like, for me, graduation should cap achievement of something, that is unusual. But if everyone gets it no matter what, if everyone is still going to leave middle school and go to high school, eighth grade graduation doesn't make sense. Like having an eighth grade grad day party or like a field day or something like that, where it's like, okay, we're all going to hang out, we're going to enjoy it, we're going to celebrate, we're going to have a barbecue, we're going to hand out like awards and stuff. We'll have like an award ceremony. Other than that, like we're just celebrating and hanging out last day and saying goodbye to everybody. That's chill. That's something I would be interested in. That's something I think is good. But I don't know, like an eighth grade graduation and like these kids like, I graduated, oh my god. And it's like, yeah, you did your work all year and you really struggled and you tried to do better. But guess what? This other fucking kid who didn't do shit all year and turned in like one assignment and then asked for a bunch of extra credit on the last day before our grades were due and just completely bombed all 2 years or all 3 years. Yeah, they're graduating too. Yeah, in fact, their name is right after your name. So, yeah, I mean, high school people actually drop out. Like, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm just saying, like, high school graduation means something. Not everybody makes it through high school, even though we really want them to. But that's something you achieve, right? And if you don't have the grades, maybe you have, like, real borderline, and maybe you still pass high school and you can get your GED, but your high school diploma, but maybe you don't have the behavior. Like, people might not actually walk in high school. Like, that's still a thing. And then college graduate, obviously, not everybody goes to college, and not everybody graduates from college. So that makes sense, too. That's like a celebration. But for me, eighth grade graduation, like, I have a 2-year-old son now. Someday he'll be in kindergarten. It's a real question for me whether I want it, whether I would actually go to a kindergarten graduation. Just because I think it emphasizes all the wrong things about school. I don't feel like you should celebrate the end of every year like that. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like you should celebrate the end of school in that aspect when you still have more to go. You should kind of be celebrating the end caps of stuff. But anyway, so yeah, that was the end of the year. And then, for those who are unaware out there, so I know maybe the random one of you out there isn't a teacher and hasn't sat down and talked with me or talked with other teacher friends of mine, or you might have. So teachers do not get paid for the summer. I need to emphasize that. All the salaries I talk about, that is for the 10-month period or 11-month period or whatever of the school year that we have. You have an option every single district to essentially ask them, say, hey, withhold a little bit of money every month, like a couple $100 every month, and then pay me over the summer in those months where I don't get a paycheck. So you can get pay for 12 months, you can get pay for 11 months. Some districts allow you to get pay for 10 months. And then if you choose 11 or 10 months, then there's July you don't get paid. If you choose 10 months, then it's usually July and August you don't get paid. So a lot of teachers, in order to make up that money deficit during those time periods, if they didn't budget right, or sometimes if they do budget right, but they still need more income because the Bay Area is very expensive, they'll do summer school. And pretty much my wife and I, for the last... that was the end of my 7th year of teaching, so I'm starting my 8th year of teaching now. Pretty much every year, it's either been my wife or myself doing summer school. Last year, I did summer school. The year before that, my wife and I did summer school. I can't remember quite. She did it at camps, and I didn't. I can't remember what the hell I did. It's all a blur. But this summer we decided to spend time with family. I had a lot of stuff going on in my life. I had my step grandpa, who's the only grandpa I ever knew on my mom's side. So my grandma remarried him on my mom's side. He's the only grandpa I knew. He passed away, unfortunately, in was it? It was May. Yeah, it was the end of May. And then beginning of June, so into May, beginning of June. And then 2 weeks later, mid-June, I had a half-brother who passed away due to some fucked up situations. I'm really going to go into that one, but it was crazy. Arizona, yeah, it was kind of insanity. His house exploded. So, as much as I'm going to go to, you can look it up online if you want to. Kind of a bizarre story. Very, very sad. Unfortunately, just the situation all around it. But I had those two pass away, and then my wife's youngest brother, he was getting married in LA. So we pretty much traveled the whole month of June. I took my mom, my wife, and my kid up to Montana to visit my grandma. We paid our respects to my grandpa. Got to see Yellowstone and travel a bit. And then we came back and then drove to Sacramento for a good friend's wedding. And down to LA for my wife's brother's wedding. And we finally got like 2 days ago. So we pretty much traveled for the month of June. We're both fucking exhausted. A lot of traveling, especially with a 2-year-old. He did great on the planes. Did actually pretty damn good in the car this time around. Usually he just effing hates cars. Everybody when we first had him was like, just put him in the car and drive around. But he does not like being restrained at all. Like, it freaks him the hell out. So anytime he's restrained, he can do it for a little bit, but then he just starts going crazy. So it's super interesting, super crazy. But yeah, we're here for June, doing a lot of housework. I think my wife is doing a training, but both of our trainings officially start the first week of August. So we're kind of cleaning up the house, hanging out with the son, and taking care of all the last minute stuff before school starts again, and starting our reading already, considering what's happening next year. And obviously I now have time, and I'm doing the first podcast in a while. So welcome to a teacher summer. It's interesting. Of course, when you're younger and possibly single, or even if you're just younger and off as a teacher, the smart ones go traveling a lot. It also depends on their personality. I'm not saying you're not smart if you don't like to travel, but come on. It's an interesting world out there. You should get out and see it. And so I guess that brings us to the actual podcast. I feel like I should make this podcast about something. Welcome. That was my introduction. This is that's what you guys have missed in the past month and a half. That's why I haven't made podcasts. I've been going everywhere, dealing with the end of school stuff, and just traveling and paying my respects where I could. Yeah. Crazy times. Anyway, I was listening to one of the Joe Rogan podcasts recently, and I think I've done that before. And he was talking with Michael A. Woods Jr., so an activist, like Black Lives Matter, a couple other things that he's involved with. Baltimore, he was running to be a police chief. I can't remember if he ran to be a police chief in Chicago or Baltimore. I cannot remember. Did not get that position, but had some interesting ideas. And they were talking about it, and all of the. I had been wanting to do a podcast. In fact, I actually started one about 2 weeks ago when we were back home just for a day or two. Kind of recorded a whole half hour and had this whole idea of what I wanted to talk about, but it didn't really coalesce into anything. So I'm actually glad I waited, because something I kind of want to talk about that I have not talked about as much. I know I've mentioned it a lot of times. I am saying a lot. See, that's how long it's been since I've done a podcast. I've forgotten to talk online. But I guess the thing that has gotten stuck in my head, especially after hearing that episode, is what is the end goal of education? Like, I think it's a question that we really, as a country in the United States, we really need to stop and think about it. We we are lost right now. I mean, obviously, you can see politically we're lost. Socially, there's a lot of like floundering about. A lot of people, masculine, feminine, incredibly lost, trying to find identities, grabbing onto any straws they can, whether it's a cultural straw, whether it's a race or like a gender identity or a movement. So, I mean, so many people are grasping and trying to become part of a group or trying to identify themselves. And I think that's a problem that education is very, very much struggling with these days. It's kind of interesting. I mean, we talked about how wanting to cut down standards a lot, and I know in the podcast we've talked a lot about like social emotional education and psychological education and career education and all these things. But I really feel, and I mean, maybe this is something I'm kind of angry with the teacher unions about. And even with teachers about, we constantly have this idea, and I'm going to include myself in this because I know I've definitely done this before, of leave us alone. We're teaching your children, and we know how to get them to where they need to go, except for we don't actually know where they should go. We have those wonderful standards that, the state and politicians and education specialists and curriculum specialists and PhD doctors and blah, 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 blah. They've all helped create a set of standards for all of the subjects that we then force kids to learn in school. And they've definitely been a part of that process, not as big of a part of the process as they need to be, but they've definitely been there. Well, what really is the end goal? What do we want to produce in our education system? And I think the problem is that we in this country, we honestly don't know anymore. We honestly have no idea. We have a lot of stuff that we think they should know. But the problem is I mean, I know I've used a cake metaphor before, but I think this is more complex. So we're going to go with a car metaphor, right? All sorts of different automobiles that you can build. Tons and tons and tons. And they all have kind of the same basic components. But they're all significantly different. And how you put those components together to get to that end structure is incredibly different. And right now in education, we have a lot of components. Your science component, your history, your math component, your English component, your PE component, your forced elective component, your language component. All these components. And they're slammed together. We're kind of letting the kids, by the time they get to high school and kind of middle school, they start to kind of decide which components they want to use to build. But prior to that, we just kind of slam them all together. And even in high school and even in middle school, we have the components, but we don't really explain how they all go together either. We like to think that we're producing these well-rounded individuals, but realistically, when you look at the curriculum and the approaches that we take to it and the way that we are attempting to teach, we're not creating well-rounded individuals. We're creating individuals who are either failures or successes in the academic world. And that's a big issue. So, for example, by the end of their high school careers, do we want kids to be good at school? Or want kids just to simply be knowledgeable? Or do we want kids who can choose a career, whether that's, technical or service or academic, etc.? Do we want them to be able to choose a career at the end of high school? Do we want them just to be obedient at the end of high school? I mean, that might be something that the politicians are really looking forward to, though. I would say that issue has clearly been raised with the European Brexit. For those who have been paying attention to international news, the British exit from the European Union. I mean, there's a lot of worried academic people out there wondering what's going to happen. And I'm going to be honest, that was produced by the British education system, which, while not exactly like ours, I would say there's not that many major differences. That idea of classical education plays a part in both. Sir Ken Robinson has brought up, do we want creativity to be the end goal of education? Should we stop our current education system, which kind of puts a halt to that creativity, and really focus on helping kids become creative, or access their creativity, access their planning? It's something that I feel that teacher unions should push more. But they don't. Because once again, teacher unions, while I love them and I am a union man, teacher unions are a part of the current system, and the current system obviously wants to maintain itself. Right? Just like the schools. Okay, so the schools aren't going to ask these questions, because that would cause a major rewrite of what's happening. Just like teachers unions, and once again, I'm a union man, but teacher unions are there to preserve teacher jobs as well as address student needs. That's kind of an identity, but honestly, if we really cut down to the core of it, the first priority, they can argue all they want to the other that benefiting teachers benefits students. But here's the thing, if we really evaluated our education system and we decided that it needed to go a completely new way, and that required all the teachers to get new credentialing or to significantly shift their jobs, or it required firing a lot of teachers and bringing in a lot of new teachers who have different skill sets, would the teacher union support that? I don't think so. I think a lot of the membership would fight that. I'll be the first to admit, teachers, we are incredibly creatures of habit. We are. I fight against that the most. I know a lot of teachers who do fight against it, but at the end of the day, if you come to a history teacher and you say, remember all that history you've been teaching for the last 15 years? We're not going to do that anymore, and you are going to focus on 4 major questions throughout this year, and you will have whatever resources you need, but you're going to create a curriculum around that. You're going to have some major blowback. That's, I guess, unless you provide a lot of support and a lot of training, but that's where the districts are going to fight against it, because, obviously a lot more money. That's a lot of expense. Asking teachers to come in for 2 weeks over the summer and paying for that time, because they should be paid for planning time. That's not something that they should have to do for free. If you're a graphic designer, you don't get hired for a job and then not paid for the hours in which you're designing the graphic before you turn it in. That's the job. You're getting paid for those hours. So, similar thing. If you're a teacher and you're asked to create a curriculum, you should get paid for the hours it takes to create that curriculum. But that's more money. Obviously, a thing that education is always worried about spending. And sometimes it's atrocious. My wife's district they didn't spend $10,000 worth of training budget they had. There was no real good excuse for that. They simply didn't approve it on the level or on the district level, and that's insane. But yeah, where should this be going? What do we want from our students? Because for myself, it's hard every year coming up with a curriculum that's just focused on my subject. I very much am a big picture person. I work better when I have an idea of an end goal. I've found pretty consistently, at least in my non-education experience, and even in my education experience, people tend to work better when there is some sort of end goal they're working to. When there's something they're attempting to create, when there's something that they know, even if it's a rough sketch, something that they're aiming for. But right now, we've got some departments building the truck engine, some departments forming a steel frame for, a convertible. Other departments building an electric system that runs off of a battery that's not going to be there for an all-electric vehicle. And then another department that's, creating windows for a bus. And all these random things at some point we hope will form some sort of working automobile at the end of the process. Like, if you really look at the education that we give kids, it is frightening what we emphasize. It really is. And people will argue until the day they die that it's all very important. They need this exposure to science. They need the exposure to history. They need the exposure to mathematics and the things they can do. The exposure to all the different types of literature. I guess depending on the depth of your physical education department, the exposure to different sports. The exposure to possible electives. I feel like electives at least make sense because their end goals are always very clear in electives. By the end of art, you will understand the basics of art and be able to produce art. Whatever type of art that may be, whether ceramics or painting, whether carving, etc. Music, you will be able to play this instrument and read the music. By the end of this language class, you will be able to speak this language fluently in that country and talk and write to those people and with those people and enjoy their culture on a level that they can enjoy it. But history, what the hell is going to be the end goal of history? Be able to read a history book and know that history happened. I don't think anyone 100% now expects people to remember all the presidents, to remember all the issues that occurred between Madison and Hamilton and Jefferson and Washington in the creation, amongst so many other people in the creation of this country. Nobody remembers those issues. I mean, some people do, obviously, the historian and the history buffs. If I ask my father about World War I, oh shit, man, I'll get all the information. That's his love. And, World War II was rolled into there as well. But, man, World War I, that's his interest. That's his passion. That's what he studied. That's what he's read about. Do we expect kids to know all of that by the end of school? What's the end purpose of mathematics? Do we expect people to be engineering a rocket and planning the projected course it's going to take? Is that why they need to take calculus in high school? Are they going to be doing particle physics? Are they going to be mixing solutions and counting the moles and balancing the chemical equations to ensure that whatever substance they're creating in their house is going to work or do what it's supposed to do? In English, are their jobs honestly going to require at all working knowledge of Aeschylus? They need to know that Shakespeare in order to get by? I would tentatively argue no. I mean, what type of individual is that? Like, honestly, if you met someone who knew all of that stuff, you would either think two things. the first thing you might think is, holy shit, this person is brilliant. This is a brilliant individual. They know a lot of stuff. However, on the other side of the fence, you would be 100% within your right, thinking, holy shit, this person is a pompous jackass. What an asshole. How they know all this shit, and why do they keep telling me about it? I don't give a fuck. I mean, some of it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I'm not saying that kids shouldn't have the chance to be exposed to stuff, but based on an education system in which those are requirements of students learning and not an option for them to explore, I would say it's highly questionable. Now, I mean, I like to not only focus on my big question, but I also like to consider for myself, if I were to sit down and consider this question, what would I want to produce by the end of high school? If I could do what I wanted, cut down the curriculum, do all these things, change the curriculum, adjust stuff, what would be the key parts of my expectations by the end of school? And when I created this list for myself prior to this podcast, what I noticed is that a majority of it is not knowledge-based, it's skills-based. And I think this has probably been fairly obvious throughout most of the other podcasts and the discussions. I feel that the skills necessary to get by in life are far more important than the knowledge that we think students might need. Because if you provide them with the skills, they should be able to find that knowledge, especially in this world right now. Maybe 30 years ago, you could argue that the knowledge was important because it's not readily available. The amount of research and searching they would have to do for that knowledge if they needed an immediate recall on it would be ridiculous. It would have been labor intensive, days, months of research, etc. That no longer applies. Right? Knowledge is readily available online. In fact, the skill to sort and categorize the knowledge available online is significantly more important than the knowledge itself, in my opinion. In order to judge sources, that's a huge thing. I mean, holy shit, how important is judging online sources? And I know I've been terrible at this. And this is something that a lot of people fall into when they first get into the internet. Before, hopefully, you have friends like mine who are like, what the fuck are you talking about? You need to do some goddamn research. And then you do the research, and then you start realizing, I need to shut my fucking mouth. I need to stop spreading lies. And so you research more, and you start considering the sources, and you start categorizing the sources that are out there. If I see something online now from, say, the Young Turks, I know it's going to lean towards the liberal side, if not the extreme liberal side. Obviously, everybody already knows Fox News. But Breitbart's a newer conservative news organization out there. And I don't mean conservative in a negative sense. I'm just saying that's the way they tend to approach issues. From a more conservative point of view, they tend to hold towards a negative view of those pushing for change in some areas. And they're not wrong. They just have a different view of what they do as good for the country versus bad for the country. Just like the Young Turks. Again, they are going to heap more praise upon people who act in a way that changes society versus those who want society to stay the same. I mean, that's kind of what a progressive versus a conservative is supposed to be. And that conversation between the two sides is important for societies. That's just my opinion. So let me just go over the list of things that I think at the end of high school, we need to get rid of this idea that everybody goes to college. I know that, I love Bernie Sanders. I would vote for him 100% if he actually got the party nomination. I would vote for him 100%, even if he didn't get the party nomination and decided to run as an independent. If he could do that legally, he can't. But If all those things were possible, yes, I would be a Bernie supporter. Sorry, folks out there, if you expected something different from all the past stations. But what I do notice, what I do think the end goal of high school should be, is that students should be basically ready for all the possible careers out there. And that includes academic careers. I think the problem right now is that high school is largely focused on college. So the end goal of high school right now is college. The problem is college doesn't quite know what it's producing either. Like, what do you do if you go to college and you become a political science major? Like, what career does that lead you to? Should college just be career oriented? Are there career graphic designer, right? Graphic design. I know people who go to school to be graphic designers and get exposure to that, or game designers, or computer programmers. Okay, so there's definitely accountants. Like, there are people who go to school for specific careers like that. But those are not universities. Those are, apprenticeship programs or training programs. All right. Right now, high schools are focused on just colleges, universities. Some of the smarter high schools have started looking at local JCs, junior colleges, and their programs. So some of our Evergreen Valley College, which, is a local college here. They have a whole car program where they get students Honda certified, and they're able to work on any Honda car. So that's a great job for people who hate school and want something practical and like working with their hands. Boom. Great program. Wonderful program. I think it's kind of hard to get into. There's also a number of schools that have great nursing programs, right? And those nursing programs now, and at least in California, have huge waiting lines. I had friends who waited like 4 years to get into their nursing programs at a junior college or at a city college, when most of the other students who are just applying for like, I just want to go and take classes, they get in immediately. They don't know what the hell they want to do, but the nursing programs are super backed up. All right, just like firefighting programs, just like I can't really think of anything else. Chef programs. I know a lot of culinary programs at JCs and colleges are packed. Right. So, for me, if I were creating my ideal education system, once again, I think the goal by the end of high school is students should be able to step into whatever career path that they want to. And they should be competent enough in all the basic skills so that when they get into that specific program, they might not have the knowledge, 100% knowledge. They should be somewhat familiar with whatever they obviously want to do, having been exposed to it earlier. But they shouldn't have concrete knowledge of it. Like, if you're going to college to study, marine biology, I think you should be somewhat familiar with biology, but I don't think you should be an expert in marine biology already. And I feel like that's kind of the way school goes, is that we are like sending kids to school for biology, and the expectation on the college level is that, they should already know biology. But I don't think that's a good approach. I think that's what college should do, because college should have significantly more research, significantly more resources, and a desire to ensure that their kids have a strong basis on a subject for moving them forward. Right? So, included in those, the skills that I thought would be very important. Okay, obviously, the students need to be able to know how to write, but not only know how to write, but also how to analyze writing. So, analyze writing, to be able to interpret kind of not only the messages that are there, but the purpose of writing. So we kind of have this as an already goal in English. Like, that's an expectation of students. Students should be able to analyze writing and determine the purpose and figure out what it's for. But I don't feel like that's emphasized as much. I think that's really important in whatever field you're in. If you're going into a technical writing field, you should understand the purpose and the procedure and the ways to write technically. I think all students should have an understanding of statistics and measurements. I mean, that's something that I know from my high school experience. I had very little experience in measurement, right? Any type of measurement. Right now, I am somewhat ashamed to admit it. I had to do most conversions through Google, and that's handy. But I think that something like that, something like measurements, should be known and used and expected by the end of high school. Like, I think that's something that everyone should know. Obviously, having science, I think the scientific process, the scientific method, everyone should be aware of, and how it's used, and how peer review works, and how that process. So when you get to these things where, people look at 1,000 papers on climate change and 2 disagree, students understand the peer review process and understand that while those 2 might be focusing on something, we should really consider, like, why is the majority of data weighted in favor of this idea of human-influenced climate change, as opposed to ignoring that humans have had an influence on it. Right? Similar to vaccinations. If, pretty much, well, no, I wouldn't go with, out of, let's say, 1,000 papers on vaccinations, only 1 says vaccinations might cause issues in African males between 12 and 16, males of African descent between, I believe that's what that one paper everybody always quotes says. Like, students should understand the scientific process enough to realize, like, okay, like, this probably we should probably not say that vaccines cause autism, because that has never been proven. I feel that students should be able to analyze history. So analyze a historical event. And what I mean by that is, if in a discussion we talked about a historical event, students would realize, like, okay, let's get multiple points of view on this event. How many other sources can we find about this? Which sources are going to be reliable, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think they necessarily need to know every historical event. I don't think they need to really understand like a specific history and commit that to memory. But I do feel that students should be able to analyze any type of history and realize where there might be flaws and where there might be issues and where biases might lie. Like, I think that's an important part of it. And I think that ties into the first thing I was talking about, that idea of analyzing writing. I think that looking at different points of view, like, I think that should be something students immediately do. Now, I know conservative educators and conservative politicians definitely kind of look at this negatively, like, oh, you are just exposing them to, these hyper revolutionary ideas. You're trying, that was the Arizona response to the Latino Studies program. Like, oh, you were teaching them to hate America. It's like, well, okay, first off, they already kind of knew that America was fucked up in that instance. All it did is give them the history to say, like, oh, this is why you have those views. This is where your views are rooted in. This is where your parents' views are rooted in. But I do think it's important, and I think one of the issues that we're noticing a lot now is this reduction in the ability or the desire of people to look at viewpoints that they consider disgusting or vile or the antithesis of their own viewpoint. Okay, and you're noticing this a lot. There's been a couple times in the news where ultra conservative speakers have been invited onto a campus, and there have been protests, and their speeches have been destroyed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think to some extent, that is a bad thing. Okay, I understand the drive. I understand that desire. I understand that that anger. But and I'm gonna quote some Sun Tzu. Like, you need to know your enemy. Like, it's an important thing, not only in having compassion for other people, because if you want to lambaste someone as uncompassionate asshole and go up to their face and scream that they're an uncompassionate asshole while they're trying to talk to you, guess who the uncompassionate asshole is? Like, whatever your views might be, in that instance, it is you. Like, unless that person specifically oppressed you prior to you shouting this out, like, you're being an asshole. That's just the fact. Sorry. I've definitely been there. Like, I definitely have expressed those views. Like, I definitely should have been called an asshole. And some of my friends are nice enough to do so in a much more polite way. But, like, I think it's important that we teach kids that they need to look at all the points of view, even the ones they don't agree with. They need to listen to them. They need to consider them. They need to analyze them. They need to figure out where those points of view come from and then make a decision about that. Okay. Now, whether that, they can take it from the approach of like, okay, I'm going to look at this point of view so I can undermine it. Yeah, fine. That's kind of a douche way to look at it, but understandable. Like, maybe that's the thing that will draw them into it, right? And it goes back to kind of that idea of like classical arguments. Like, we've really lost that in our society. Now we go for simply like shaming or shutting people down. But there is an important part in looking at other people's arguments and understanding how their brains work in order to eventually, if that's your desire, eventually to change their minds. And that's my assumption. My assumption is that you would like to at some point change people's minds. And I think kids would like that ability. They like to understand how can I get people to do what I want? Right? There's always going to be that point. Whether they want to do something for themselves or for others, that's not what I'm focusing on. But being persuasive, being analytical, that's an important skill that will help you in whatever career you want. Finally, this is a big thing. It ties into engineering, it ties into all sorts of stuff, but the idea to like plan, create, and revise. Whether that delves into like physical education, nutrition plans, something that I definitely think kids should be leading and physical education department should be doing. And I understand why the government probably doesn't want to emphasize that, because the first thing they're going to do is school lunches and go like, okay, how can we plan, create, or revise the school lunches that are currently there in order to produce something better? You're going to get some blowback. You really are. Probably from the, once again, the support services unions. Okay, that's another strong union within schools. But again, everything I've listed, right? So again, analyze writing, understand stats and measurements, scientific process, analyze history, look at points of view, plan, create, revise, be self-critical, but so focused on, fixing the issues. Like, all of those things are skills. Right? And if the end goal were just those, I feel like so more classes would become more personalized, become more individualized, become more interesting as we push kids towards those. But right now, that's just my idea. And how do you get by and how would you measure those aspects? Honestly, the only way you can measure them is kids get into the programs that they want to, and then they do well. And then the economy does well. Can you have a standardized test for scientific process? Yes. All of these things can technically be tested. Do you need to test all of it? I think that's something, again, that will be shown in the kids' lives. If you're just wanting to test it for the sake of teacher performance reviews, well, okay, yeah, every job has performance reviews. That's fine. But we really need to consider, we really need to talk and spread the word that this is a national discussion that's to happen. What do we want from our kids? Should everyone go to college like Bernie Sanders says? Does everyone have the right to go to college? Yeah, okay, I'll agree with that. Everyone should have the right to be able to go to whatever career or technical program or college that they want. But are we preparing them for that? Are we burdening our students with useless crap from the 20th and the 19th and 19th centuries that no longer apply to modern day education? Is education right now a positive benefit to students? Or is it an anchor around their neck? And I know a lot of people say, like, I mean, there's going to be a big divide. I mean, that's a hard question. I don't 100% know the answer. Some kids thrive, some kids don't. Just like society. And I know I know the folks out there are like, oh, that's why I homeschool kids. Well, I don't agree with homeschooling either. I think exposing kids to socially those around them is also an important skill that they need to learn. And maybe there should be an educational component about that. Navigating social issues. Like that's a huge thing. How do you not be the guy who's written up or the girl who's written up at the office for saying inappropriate stuff or doing inappropriate things to people? How do you deal with those other points of view? And that's something that charters and private schools, all of them have that as a core issue, which is that lack of exposure to multiple points of view on how life is. And, you as a homeschool teacher, you can personally try to go out and introduce them to other people, do all those things. But in the end, it's you and your points of view that control it. In a charter school, it's the charter school's points of view that control it. In a private school, which tend to be religious or possibly military, like it's those points of view that control it. In a public school, you have a lot of different points of view. I mean, if I'm going with if I were describing the typical high school experience, like let's say I had a liberal English teacher, I had a conservative history teacher, I had a hippie for a ceramics teacher, I had a effusive agnostic, I believe. I never asked a science teacher, but I never question my teacher's belief and really care. I had multiple views and multiple views of viewing the world and multiple ways of viewing information. And they were all interesting and they were all equally important in helping me form what my views would eventually be. That's something you lose when you do homeschooling. That's something you lose in private and charter schools, as much as they like to claim otherwise. Hell, that's something you lose in magnet programs. That's something you lose in school choice programs. Because you get a bunch of people of the same view together. Again, every podcast I try to focus on something. This one just happened to be a brainstorm ignited by a Rogan podcast. So thank you, Mr. Rogan, if you're out there, if you ever happen to hear this episode. I highly doubt it, but, man can dream. I'm going to call it for tonight. Thank you for paying attention, listening. I know I try to keep these somewhat in half an hour increments. I guess I'm a little over that as far as a monologue goes. If you have any questions, or if you ever want to participate in a podcast, email me. My email is Mr. Period. So Mr. Period Alberts, ALBERTS, P.D at gmail.com. So Mr. Alberts P.D at gmail.com. You can email me questions there, email me any thoughts, email me if you'd like to participate in this over the summer. I will try to find some folks to actually interview, and not interview, but, sit and talk. I mean, they're friends. I'll sit and talk with some of my friends at some point. Yeah. And I mean, if you have an idea, throw it out there. I have a bunch of stuff from my friend Charlie, who's in Japan. Charlie, if you're listening to this, I am so sorry I haven't included any of your stuff in my podcast yet. That video you sent me with all those questions, that is wonderfully somewhere on the internet. I believe it's somewhere in your Facebook. I have yet to figure out how the hell to import the audio to this. So, other than like playing it separately, computer open next to this phone, then the sound sucks. I'll be honest, the sound is awful. So, I know at some point we're visiting Japan to see you, so we'll do an episode while I'm out there with you, and that actually might be a hell of a lot more fun for me, and hopefully for you. Excuse me. Any other things I should bring up? Nope. I think that's going to be it. I'll try to kind of get back into the groove of one of these every week or every other week again. Thank you again for listening. I have no idea anymore what episode number this is. I'm actually probably going to start just titling these episodes. So I guess thank you for listening to Discussions in Education. And this one's title is going to be, What is the End Goal? All right. Much love to everybody out there. Thank you very much for listening again. This is Tony Alberts. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.